Coming to you direct from the nerve center of the galaxy's greatest comic. This is the 2000 AD Thrillcast.
Borak Thung athletes, and welcome back to the 2000 AD Thrillcast, and welcome to 2022. It's already turning into an interesting year, so let's see how it plays out. But we are back for more from the Galaxy's Greatest podcast every 2 weeks. On this episode, we're talking to Joe Sullivan and Steve Marchant, who are part of the team that has put together the Dredd at 45 exhibition that is taking place in the London Cartoon Museum. And of course, it is our 45th birthday this year at 2000 AD, and there's a whole bunch of things coming up which should be an awful lot of fun. Not much in the way of physical events, unfortunately, because there's a pandemic on, but certainly we'll be keeping you up to date on what's happening for the 45th birthday celebrations on the 2000 AD Thrillcast. Some bad news before we get started. Those of you who ordered the just exceptional Brian Bolland Apex edition, which is going to be coming out soon. I'm afraid it's going to be coming out soon, slightly later than we thought. International paper shortages have affected production of the book. Despite ordering early, we were unable to get the paper to the printers on time. So that's going to be delayed. We will, of course, keep you updated whether you bought one or not on what's happening with that. But let's not let that dampen our enthusiasm for the 45th anniversary, because there's plenty of amazing books and celebration of creators and fans alike. 45 years. Wow. Geez. Anyway, let's crack on with this first episode. It's going to be a long year, where we talk to Joe and Steve from the Cartoon Museum. Now, Dredd at 45 started last week and is a capsule exhibition. So it's a quite a bit smaller than the big 40th anniversary event that they did a few years ago, 5 years ago, in fact. But it narrows down onto Dredd and very specifically how the characters stayed the same, but the artwork kind of changes around him. The process of making comics, of drawing comics, of producing comics changes around him. So he's a real bellwether for comic books over the last 45 years. It's a fantastic little exhibition with pieces by Brett Ewings, Brian Bolland, John Burns, Tom Foster, Greg Staples. So if you're able and willing to get down into London, please do make sure you go along to the Cartoon Museum and take a look. But it was fantastic to talk to Joe and to Steve about the thinking behind this exhibition and the wider mission of the Cartoon Museum. All right, so it's great to welcome our first guests of 2022, and both from roughly the same location, but in slightly different parts of it. We've got Joe Sullivan, who's the director of the Cartoon Museum, and Steve Marchant. Steve, what's your official title and role at the museum?
I'm the learning officer, which means I teach people stuff about comics and cartoons.
Good. And, as we all know, all comics are a learning experience. Sometimes it's a bad learning experience. Sometimes it's a good learning experience. But I thought I'd get you on because New Year, our 45th anniversary year, and we have been working with you guys to put together you call it a capsule exhibition, don't you, of Judge Dredd. Judge Dredd at 45 years on the mean streets of Mecha City 1 and the pages of 2000 AD. Joe, I want to start with you. Obviously, we've when was the last show that we did with the Cartoon Museum? It was a few years ago now, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I think it was the 40th anniversary. I wasn't at the museum at the time, so I don't know. But I think it was the 40th anniversary. I know it was at the old site, and it was quite an extensive one. I think it took over a lot of the museum. This one's a little bit smaller in our in focus space.
So, tell us a little bit about your thinking on why you wanted to do something rather than it be, another big 2000 AD show, why this is much more focused and specifically on Judge Dredd.
Well, I think the interesting thing for us is obviously 2000 AD itself is wide. There's a lot of stuff to cover there. And the museum has multiple different spaces. And what we like to do with our own focus space is pick out something that's a really interesting story, something that we can look at in a slightly different way and bring a slightly new light on. Quite often it might be different people's individual stories or, the work of an artist you never heard of. In the case of Dredd, you've got this iconic, famous character. We want to think about what light we shine on that in a really specific way that people might not have considered. And 45 years is a long time for us to try and cover in one exhibition. So the way we sort of looked at it is we thought Judge Dredd himself is pretty much always the same. His design's not changed all that much. His character was established really early on. But the interesting thing is the world has changed around him during those 45 years. And one of the things we really tried to highlight at the museum is the work of artists and writers and how people make comics and cartoons, because we want to inspire, our visitors to pick up a pencil and draw their own cartoons. So it's important that they understand how things are made and the techniques that go into them. So looking at the different artistic techniques over 45 years, there's been so much change from the earliest to the most recent, where it's so fully digital. The Tom Foster piece we have in the exhibition, there's no physical piece of, it's all digital. And the change from that's crazy over that period, because the way I like to put it is some of the techniques that artists are using today would be sci-fi tech and absolutely crazy when Judge Dredd first appeared as a character, and it might have appeared in the comic as an example of this futuristic technology. And that's kind of where we actually are today. But throughout that, Judge Dredd's remained the same. He's remained steadfast. And that's really what the exhibition's looking at, is it's trying to give an insight into how that art and those techniques has changed, but Judge Dredd has remained the same throughout that time.
It's one of the fascinating things about it, because the costume is so identifiable, so outlandish, so ridiculous. There's that wonderful line from John Wagner, he looks like a fucking Spanish pirate. But one of the things that, looking at the artwork that you guys have got for this show, is actually, for all of its detail, just how adaptable that design is. Whether it's Carl Susqueira, Brett Ewings, Greg Staples, there's something about it that just makes it so recognizable, but so adaptable to an individual artist's style. It's incredible, really. As you say, he stayed the same, but also he hasn't at exactly. There's been all these myriad different interpretations of him.
He always acts like a control case, if you want to look at it scientifically, it's like a control case, and, someone will come in and give him a massive epaulette, someone will come in and give him a massive jaw or whatever. And, the actual core of it is ostensibly the same, but like you say, it's those sort of tweaks and individual preferences or how people are responding to styles at the time, and those are the actual changes in a way.
Steve, I wanted to talk to you about the selection of art that you've got in this show, because we've had meetings where you've been through what you've had available and how it fits into the narrative. There's a lot of pages out there, scattered to the four winds. There's people that you've worked with before to source artwork. Take us through the process for something like this, from going, well, actually, this is our intention for this exhibition. How are we going to make it into a reality?
Well, luckily, we benefited from the fact that a number of the people that loaned us artwork for the 40th anniversary exhibition have kept in touch. They've become, friends of the museum, or friends on Facebook. And so I've been in fairly regular contact with people who've always said, we'd be happy to lend you stuff again. So essentially, that's what I did, was just reached out to those individuals and put just a general thing out that we were looking for some Dredd artwork, but this time it wouldn't be some massive kind of exhibition of 80 pages of work. It was going to be quite a sort of discreet and defined display. And basically just waited to see who came forward with offers of work. And then, as you know, we kind of sifted through what was available at that time and made a selection from there. One thing which was kind of saddening really was that several people that we borrowed work from in 2017 came back and said they'd had to sell a lot of the pages that they owned because the pandemic hadn't been kind to them, and a lot of people have had to sort of try and find some extra money to live on. So people have been saying they've had to sell off their art collection. So stuff that I really wanted, they would be saying, "Oh, we don't have that anymore." And I mean that's just really tragic, really. But but I think we made a good thing. We were, as Joe says, I mean, we were concentrating on the different styles and techniques. And what's interesting as well is they're all still valid. I mean, Dredd began by being drawn in just black ink on paper, and you can still draw Dredd that way. But what we've tried to show is just basic examples of the differing techniques. So moving into colour, whether it's colour wash, coloured ink, whether it's fully painted artwork, and then with Tom Foster's display and with the video commentary that we have, which is hilarious. He takes us through that process. But I mean, he got in touch with me recently saying he was going back to fully painted work with an acetate line overlay. So as he suddenly realised it was taking him 19 times longer to do it digitally than anybody else would take.
I mean, I did wonder whether, considering, so anybody who's not seen it, there's a video on the 2000 YouTube, which is one of our From the Drawing Board videos, which Tom did and edited himself, which, as Steve says, is hilarious. But also, when you kind of scratch beneath the jokes, it's the story of a man going absolutely mad, being driven insane by his own process. I didn't think he could make it any more complex than he already had, but apparently, just add in more computers.
Well, there's a great line, which I always, whenever I'm walking past the display, I always wait to hear it, where he says, computers can do lots of things, but if you can't draw, you're rubbish.
Well, I mean, that's it's really interesting, the continuity just in that point alone, because of course you got a page of Brian Bolland.
Yeah.
From the height of his power, the Punks Rule story. Yeah. It wasn't too long after that, of course, that Brian and Mick basically walked away from doing sequentials on Dredd, yeah. particularly Mick, drawing all those crowds in Blockmania. And it's fascinating that the artists still are pumping so much work. It's not necessarily that computers have made it easier. It's a different way of doing the same work, the same process kind of thing.
It's a paint box. I mean, when I'm teaching groups of young people here at the museum, or when I'm teaching adults at City Lit, obviously, at City Lit we use computers, but I always have to tell them that it's just a paint box. It won't do the drawing for you. It won't put together the visual storytelling on the page. That comes from your brain. There isn't a wonderful page layout button that you can press on your keyboard, and there you go. It's another tool, and but like I said earlier, you could just go back to pen and ink. You could watercolor. It's all still valid. I mean, you see that in the pages of 2000 AD today. You see, as you flick through it, you see a myriad of techniques still, being executed. I
wonder how much of it actually is relating to how people share a lot of their work now, though. If you think about a lot of newer artists they discover via Instagram, and the kind of immediacy of drawing on, say, a tablet or something, and your final piece is already digitized, it's right there. You can upload that straight to your Instagram or whatever, and the immediacy of that is kind of how the world's moved anyway in a lot of things. Wonder how much that's just actually part of it. It's more preferable to do it that way because you can share it quicker.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting point, because 2000 AD is still, we have digital subscribers and digital readers, but we're still very much a print medium. And I guess one of the interesting things about this exhibition is that throughout it all, throughout the changing process that artists go through to create these pages, the end product is still the same. It's still a physical comic. So, like you say, Joe, if you're wholly online there's an immediacy to that. You finish it, it's out there. Whereas preparing something for print creates an extra, not a barrier, but there's an extra stage there,
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, I'm slightly biased, I guess, because we, I guess celebrate's a good word for it, but also, display and collect physical works primarily. That's the thing that people come to see. So I'm always going to be kind of banging the drum for physical stuff because that's a museum stock in trade. I don't think anyone wants to go to a museum and just look at screens all day because you can do that at home. So, the things that I guess for me, but also visitors, the things that really jump out to people are, how the speech bubbles are arranged and the fact that they might be put on afterwards and you can see that the blue text peeling off or whatever. You can see all the little annotated lines and things. That tells a big story, and that's what, I guess the business of a museum is taking those physical artifacts and telling stories around them and the people that made them and context of the world they were made in, all of that stuff. It's harder to do that with digital. It's not completely impossible. There was a great conversation I had with someone who collected a meme for, I think, Bradford Museum of Science and Industry. And they, collected this meme. It was a big fat sheep. And they collected all of this stuff around it that was like reactions to it and Twitter posts reusing it and all of that stuff. And the whole value of it was how it had been reused and remade. And that was the story that meme told, And it's an interesting one for us because there's that ongoing question we sort of have a little bit in the office about, is a meme a cartoon? Is where do you draw the line at someone making a political or satirical or comedic point using a still image? And so there's this quite wide debate about how digital is infusing all of these parts of comics and cartoons and things. And as I say, it's the reaction to it, the context it exists in that makes it interesting. And that's, there's a weird kind of, I don't know, there's a weird thing around that when it comes to digital because it's a new world. It's not something that we've been valuing in a certain way for a long time. And that's where you get into conversation about NFTs and things, is that we value art in a physical sense. Does an NFT have value and all that stuff? But it's definitely an interesting debate, I think.
It's interesting that you know about people's love of seeing, placement of speech bubbles, bits of blue tack, printers marks. Because obviously we're doing the Apex editions this year. The Brian Bolland and Mick McMahon one, where rather than just presenting cleaned up artwork, it's essentially just a photograph of the artwork as it exists now as an artifact. Because some of these pages that you've got up in this exhibition bear, for want of a better phrase, bear the scars of the past. They have the physical process of making comics embedded in the artifact itself, printers marks, acetates, gum to hold things onto the page. And Steve, I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what that means as a museum, but also in terms of kind of the visitor experience, the connection that you're drawing between the past, the process, and the visitor who's looking at it.
Well, our visitors are a varied bunch. I mean, some people do just come in and they just kind of glance around, have a few laughs, or they look at the comic art and go, oh, it's Judge Dredd. And they just wander through and they're in and out in 25 minutes. Other people come and I will stand there and study pieces of cartoon and comic art, for 5 or 10 minutes at a time. And they're the ones that they're our favourites. And they're the ones that will be going, oh, look, these speech bubbles were on an acetate sheet. And if I'm there, and sometimes I'm showing people around, or I just happen to be passing, or perhaps I'm stalking them in a creepy way. But I can then tell them that, well, one of the reasons for doing that was so that the work could be translated easily for printing abroad. You could just do new bubbles on a new acetate sheet in French or German, boo, boo, boo. That's been superseded now by layers in Photoshop or what have you. So, people can see the old methods, but they're all still valid methods. People at home could do it that way if they wanted to. And it's a bit like the whole thing with the Cartoon Museum, everything that we show, really. It's a bit like those the making of extras that you get on a DVD. So you see your favorite sci-fi film or something, and then sometimes you'll get like a 20-minute documentary at the end where it shows you all the behind-the-scenes kind of trickery that made it look like somebody was flying or, jumping off buildings and things. And that's kind of what we do is, you can see, as Joe said, you can see where something was stuck on top with blue tack. You can see the Tipex. Oh, the Tipex saved my life as a young cartoonist. Because my stuff was ladled with Tipex, covering up ghastly mistakes. And I would cut things out and glue them over the top to correct things. I thought that made me a rubbish artist. Now, arguably I am anyway, but when I got to see a real original artwork, that the great and the good were covering up mistakes with Tipex or white paint, and or cutting out, redrawing bits and gluing them on. So that's why we do it.
No, it's something of endless fascination to me, with that kind of process, and it's great to see it with the Apex editions. It was great to see it for the 40th anniversary. In terms of the pieces that you've got for this show, are there particular elements in the pieces that you've got that kind of stand out to you as that's actually a fascinating piece of process, or that kind of sticks out as something that's unique to that piece?
Well, there's one thing. On the earliest page we've got is by Brett Ewings. And Brett, on his page, you do get the thing of like Dredd's uniform isn't quite as kind of caricatured or exaggerated as it became. The shoulder pads look as though they'd still work in real life and you'd still be able to move your arms, which is not how Dredd became. But also, it's black and white artwork with letretone, which grey tone that was cut out and stuck down. It was a terribly time-consuming and fiddly process. And I get asked about that probably the most, about any kind of aspect of drawing comics. Even though these days, as I tell people, you do it digitally now, if you've got any sense. But I suppose there are some purists that still want to drive themselves mad, tracing out an area and cutting it with a scalpel and praying it lands in the right place when you press it down. So when we see something like that, which has been kind of superseded, that's a kind of, I think, an interesting thing for people to see, is like, that's the old way of doing it. You could still do it that way if you wanted to. But I tried to choose just basic examples of different techniques. So there's black and white artwork, Bolland, it's in beautiful black and white. He used, chiaroscuro, as we call it, a lot more. Really harsh areas of black and white with the whites blending, feathering into the black. But then you've got the early days of when 2000 AD went full colour. And so then you've got black and white line art that's basically just coloured in with coloured inks. And then you've got artists then that began moving more and more into it being more of a painted situation. I remember you had Simon Bisley, for instance. It was really big for quite a few years back in the early 90s.
Never heard of him.
So, there's all those changes. But with only, essentially 9 pieces of work on display, we just tried to choose 9 different methods that show the way that the art's changed over the last 45 years.
Joe, this is quite a broad question. What do you think, beyond the museum's remit to explain and bring comics to the masses, what's the value of doing a capsule exhibition like this, do you think? Not just for those who are coming to see it, but also from your perspective, from the museum's perspective?
I suppose there's 2 interesting ways to look at it. It's like, number one, from a visitor perspective, it would be people that love Dredd get to look at Dredd in a new way. People who have no idea who Judge Dredd is or what 2000 AD is are being exposed to something which maybe the way that we present it would get them interested in it. Maybe they've never read a 2000 AD comic, but by looking at all of this 45 years of art together and understanding the process behind it, think, oh, that's really interesting. I'd like to look into this a little bit more. The other side of it from us is it's almost like a learning experience. It's something where we get to try to work out how to tell a new story, and I think this is a big kind of part of where the museum is at the moment. We're still learning a little bit about how we can reach different audiences, tell different stories. And so the space is quite a flexible one for that, you know, and we've got obviously Judge Dredd in there at the moment. Last year we had 3 large Ralph Steadman artworks, and it was kept really kind of austere, and it was big focus on the artwork, and we sort of experimented in that way. We had an exhibition before Dredd called Black, which was about a guy called Tobias Tate, who grew up in the 1970s care system and wrote a book and a graphic novel about his experiences. So we were sort of telling his story. And we put like a little bed in there, you know, so we tried to recreate his childhood bedroom. And the space is nice and flexible for us to try and do that. And putting on an exhibition like Dredd kind of allows us to experiment with how we're telling a story in a way that a big exhibition can't, a lot of the time at least.
It allows us to focus right in on something or on like a specific aspect of somebody's work. I mean, sometimes people often come to the museum and say, my God, there's so much to see. I'll have to come back. I won't see it all. Whereas this enables us to show either a particular character or an artist, and just in quite sort of, you know, micro detail, really. So, yeah, it might only be, you know, 10, 12 pieces of work, but it's carefully considered so that you hopefully will get, you know, it's like a taster course, perhaps, in a person's work, or about a character that you could then look into further. It's digestible. People can come in and they can look at that and not feel like, oh, I'll have to come back, or, oh, is it going to finish? Oh, well, I won't be able to come back and see it again, and like that. So it gives us that advantage.
I think one of the other nice things is kind of like Steve was saying, you know, we have all these different types of visitors. We have people that do come and see absolutely everything. You know, there's a guy that comes every Thursday evening and looks at museums section by section on an art pass. And every time he comes back the following week, he looks at a new section, but he looks at everything in absolute detail. So kind of, you know, gives us the opportunity to match that detail in a way, because a lot of our galleries, you know, we've got a few pieces by Steve Bell and a few pieces by, you know, Gilroy, whoever, and there'll be a couple of captions about it, but, you know, it can't go that much more in depth because we're trying to cover hundreds of years worth of cartooning and caricature, as well as comics, as well as our big temporary exhibition after that. You know, there's just so much going on. You know, something like the Dredd exhibition allows us to come up to the level of someone that want to know a load of stuff about one specific thing. And like Steve said, kind of zero in on that and provide that kind of pop-out experience.
I mean, that's one of the things. I remember having a conversation some time ago with somebody who sneered at the word cartoon in the context of the museum, and you know, their assumption was, well, cartoons are for kids, comics are, you know, they're the superior thing. But of course, as you said, cartoon actually allows you to cover so much more, and so much more actually the history of comics, because, you know, you can't understand the history of comics without understanding satirical cartoons going all the way back to Hogarth and beyond. So it's fascinating that particularly the new space is allowing you to do that. I was going to ask about that because you know, you went through all that work and then opened, and then the pandemic came along. Now I don't want to kind of, you know, jab the open wounds, but how has it been over the last couple of years as a visitor attraction when you've not got any visitors?
It's been insane. I think it's the best way to put it. Like, the experience of it, it's been really magnified for me because this is my first job as a director, and I started in January 2020. And my first role as a director is to close a museum, which is never, it's never the best way to go, you know. I don't know. It's been obviously a really mixed couple of years for us. You know, in very specifically and very seriously, we lost one of our long-standing staff members and friends, Alison Brown, to COVID in January 2021. You know, and that puts everything else in perspective. To be honest, you know, the museums obviously had struggles. We're not immune to a lot of that. We've been very lucky with fundraising. You know, we've been able to stay open. We've been really pleased with the amount of visitors that have been coming back. You know, we reached 80% of our normal numbers in September and October 2021, but it does kind of pale in comparison to kind of both the loss of the staff and the volunteers and the team at the museum has suffered as part of that, but also the wider loss that people across the world have had at the same time. So it's sorry to bring it down to a slightly downer note, but we've had a slightly more fortunate outcome of the pandemic compared to a lot of other museums, but we've also had a very difficult experiences along that way. It's I don't know. All I can say is we're open. We've had some really great exhibitions open in the last sort of 7-8 months since we reopened in May. We've had people coming back. There's people in the galleries laughing. We haven't had to make anyone redundant, which is, that's not a given. That's not a given at all. We've got loads of great new projects starting. No, this is the platform I've decided that I'm going to use to tell Steve he's fired. We've had a load of good projects and things starting. Steve did this brilliant project last year called Life Under Lockdown, where he was working with local youth centres, and they were drawing their own comics about the experience of being under lockdown, which was fantastic. And that's something we're rolling out again this year. And what I'm really passionate about is making everyone have the opportunity to draw and tell stories using comics and cartoons, and museums should be a hub for that. And that's something really, really interesting to me, and that's what our purpose should be. We've had a lot of opportunities come out of the rollout from the lockdown and reopening, and as I say, we've been quite fortunate with funding, but there's a big kind of cloud that's hung over the last 2 years for various reasons.
Yeah, I mean, straight off the bat, we were devastated to hear about Alison, and also because we'd had so many conversations with her and the other staff at the museum about all the exciting things we were going to do, come the opening. In terms of the space, now the old building was great. It was lovely. The 40th event you did a few years ago was fantastic. But this space, it seems within the conversation we had, it just seems that you've got a lot more adaptability. There's a lot more scope to do little things like this, and that's baked in. That's the purpose of the space, really.
Yeah, I think one of the great things that the trustees did when they moved the museum is they kind of had a bit of a think about where we want to go in the future. So the space is all on one level. It's got lift access down to the basement. And the most important, it costs us £1 a year because it's on a peppercorn rent. So in one fell swoop, they got rid of all of our rent obligations, which were quite sizable at the last place. And then they sort of brought in a really talented curator, Emma, our curator, who's worked at the Science Museum and on touring exhibitions around the world, with a kind of brief that we want to reach loads of new people and do really interesting exhibitions. And the stuff she's been coming up with has been fabulous. We've got an exhibition on called Laughter Lab at the moment, which she's been working with the University of Oxford's Department of Psychology to kind of make an exhibition that's a participatory thing where visitors judge which cartoons are funniest, that feeds into scientific research that answers the question, how do you make a funny cartoon? Is there a code for making a funny cartoon? Which is such a great idea, and the whole kind of plan that they've had going forward is to have this much more open space. We've got little pop-up areas. We've got a specific bigger room for learning. We've got more walls to put, young cartoonist pictures up and things like that. We've got a really good team in place that have been doing loads of really interesting things. So we're in a really good position, actually, and that kind of comes from that move. That was the first step in that. And getting the team together and getting the new place kind of set up. So theoretically, we're now at the point where we can really jump forward. We've been slightly hamstrung by the pandemic, so we're a little bit further down the road than we hope to be. But it's the site's really great. It's bigger than the old one. As I say, most importantly for me, I think it's all on one level, so it's much more accessible. I think it's cool.
I just want to turn back specifically to Dredd at 45 for a little bit. Steve, there is quite an interesting spread of art in this exhibition. So as I say, we go from very early Brett Ewings, to Brian Bolland. You've got Carlos Esquerra, John Burns, all the way through to somebody more recent like Tom Foster. Is there for you, is there a standout piece? Because one of the things that really struck me about the choices of artwork that we went with was how much it was drawing in styles that actually dominated a lot of other parts of comics as well. Particularly somebody like John Burns, who's been going for so long and was very well known for other comics work. Is there a piece that really stands out to you as exemplifying Dredd's place within the wider comics world?
That's a really difficult question to answer, because there isn't just one definitive Dredd picture. I mean, that's that's kind of the whole point and purpose of the display, is to show that whilst Dredd essentially remains the same, artists interpret them in their own way. And also, it's with some of the artists, like you mentioned John Burns, who he was drawing comics like when I was a kid in the early 70s. I remember he drew like Countdown comic, and he started, and then it was like just like pen and ink with colour washes over the top, quite psychedelic. And he's about 80 odd. He's doing this like fully painted artwork. He's in the recent issues of the comic. So I honestly can't just point to any of the pages that we've got on display as being that's the one that clicks it, because to me each of them stand out on their own merits. And also, if you are fans of a particular artist that we've got on display, it's always interesting to see like the development. I mean, the Greg Staples piece we've got it's early in his career, and it's quite cartoony. It's fully painted, but it's very exaggerated. Dredd has a massively, like an anvil for a chin, and his helmet's all out here, and it's very kind of painted, but very cartoony. Compare that to what he does now, and goodness me, I mean, now he has this amazing photorealistic kind of style that, blows me away. And I did try and get a page of his more recent artwork, but with the time constraints that we had, it wasn't possible. But, I would love to beg, borrow, or steal another of his pages, and maybe be able to display the two side by side and say, look, Mum, what I did, said Greg. So, yeah.
It struck me so much, coming back to what we were talking about at the beginning, how different all these styles are. For one comic book character, to be able to go from somebody who was quite pop arty, like Brett Ewings, all the way through that kind of classical, pen and ink style of Bolland, painted artwork, and now digital artwork. It's just, it is so striking, as we said at the beginning. This is a character who is endlessly adaptable, but always the same. And you can say that about a lot of comic book characters, but they're relatively. I've always felt perhaps unreasonably, they're always quite simple. The strength of those characters is their simplicity. So you talk about silhouettes and outlines, and you can easily recognize Superman, you can easily recognize Batman. But Dredd is so complex, and yet that seems to be the essence of his adaptability. I mean, it's not an exaggeration to call Carlos a bloody genius for what he managed to do.
Well, you can exaggerate up or tone down the elements of Dredd's uniform. You can have a massive eagle on his shoulder, or it can just have quite a discreet one. But it's still the same design elements, but artists can go with it how they want. Dredd's one of these iconic figures in comics, like Batman. You could say the same about him, and several others who, no matter what artist does it. With Batman, they might make his ears longer or shorter. His cape might just look like a real cape, or it might look like a bed sheet blowing in the wind. But he's always Batman. And the thing with like Batman and the more iconic characters, and with Dredd, is they look essentially the same. Other characters in the wacky world of comics, so many superheroes wear different costumes. It'll be a way of getting new sales. Is like, oh look, Spider-Man's got a pink spotted costume now. Come and discover the secret story of this strange event. And they do that with so many of the the other characters because they feel that, like, I don't know, maybe they lose confidence in the way they look. I mean, Spider-Man had a black outfit for a while, and everybody was like, whoop-de-doo about that. I mean, by the time that happened, I was of an age where I thought, this is just to try and sell more comics. And also, it's easier to draw. Although I'm sure all of your Dredd artists might say, look, okay, we're going to give him a black spandex outfit. They might thank you for that. It's a lot less details to draw.
It was when a few years after the Dredd movie came out, and I think it was Henry Flint started. It was a great idea. The biker collar that went around the movie uniform. He started putting that into the comics a little bit, and I was like, "Are you insane? That one more thing you have to draw on top of all these other things?" Particularly, I mean, you mentioned about Dredd's chin being like an anvil, because somebody like Siku took that to its absolute extreme. Like, it wasn't just that; it was a scalpel, almost. Almost, and seeing the reaction to things like, that's not how chins work. Have you seen the rest of him? Like, the chin is the most realistic thing. In that design. Anyway, by the way, but yeah, it's fantastic to that in such a relatively small exhibition, you've just got so much going on. In the choice of artwork, the amount of time that it covers, and just the variety is absolutely fantastic. I mean, thinking about the future, not wishing to put you on the spot or anything, but with so many possible exhibitions, so many characters, so many artists, is exploring more of 2000 AD, whether it's specific artists or specific characters, something that you think has value for the Cartoon Museum, or is this kind of the not the sum total, but this
is the last one we'll ever do.
God damn it! I really bought into that one, didn't I?
Yeah. You've played your hand. You overplayed your hand. Never again. Yeah. No. I mean, obviously, like, for us, what we want to do is champion the best of British comics and cartoons. That's our raison d'etre. It's British stuff, British artists. So 2000 AD is always going to be a big component of that. I mean, we almost permanently have 2 or 3 2000 AD pieces on display. I think at the moment we've got a Dredd piece in a comics gallery as well. I think next to a Strontium Dog, and there's another one as well. I can't remember off the top of my head what it is. It's always going to form a part of our collection and part of our displays. And I think like that's only going to grow because, I mean, we only started collecting comic art in earnest in about 2015 when we had a grant for it, and we collected a lot very quickly, but that's only going to continue, I think. And obviously the more stuff we, sorry, that's the door buzzer. The more stuff that we collect, the more stuff we'll be able to display and so on and so forth. I think what we've kind of got coming up over the next few years is very interesting, and I'm sure we'll continue chatting with you beyond that.
Somebody really wants to get in, Joe. Well, I think at that point, it's we can bring this to a close, because I would heartily recommend the show. I've not seen it physically, but I've seen plenty of photos and it looks fantastic. And there's a couple of my favourites in there, which is always nice to see. And I noticed I think it was somebody on Instagram went, why is there no Steve Dillon, Mick McMahon, blah, blah, blah. And like, what you're talking about is a huge, if you want every artist, then, that's a different kettle of fish. But it's great to see that even on a relatively small exhibition, you've just managed to do so much with it. It's fantastic.
Well, very pleased you like it, Mike. And yeah, I mean, there's countless artists, the great and the good. We don't have, on this occasion, we don't have Mike McMahon, and we don't have any Steve Dillon. It's not because we don't want to. Those artists were heavily represented when we did the 2017 exhibition. One or two of the people that we're showing now weren't in that exhibition. So Dredd's been around for so long that so many fantastic artists have drawn him, that there'll always be somebody that perhaps regrettably will be left out, but not forever. And in the future, we'll have work by them on display.
I think it's fair to say, like, the conversations around who we could feature were quite heavily drawn by who we could get in time for the exhibition to open, because Christmas came right in the middle of the design period. So we were closed for about 4 weeks. So we were slightly hamstrung in that sense, because there was a lot of people we did really want to feature, but we couldn't get hold of their work for whatever reason. So it's not, the intention is to sideline anybody. It's the space and time is always a premium for an independent charity museum, unfortunately. Something we deal with every day.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, hopefully lots of people go along and see this one. So, yeah, thanks very much indeed for chatting about it, guys. Well, for those of you who've been able to get to London to see Dredd at 45, all the feedback's been absolutely fantastic. So thank you for supporting that. Do go along if you are able. And thank you to Joe and to Steve for chatting away about the exhibition. It's just such a brilliant museum. Whether you're going for the Dredd show or not, it's well worth your time. This episode, fairly short and sweet, but we've got plenty more to come from the Galaxy's Greatest podcast over the coming months, specifically to celebrate 2000 AD's 45th birthday. So we shall see you in a fortnight's time. As always, even in the new year, stay safe, look after one another, and Splendid Verthrig.